Hello and welcome to this very special D-Day live stream, brought to you from the deck of the only surviving D-Day landing craft tank 7074 here in Portsmouth at the D-Day story. I'm Richard Cutland, former tankie with the Royal Tank Regiment and now head of military relations for Wargaming.
Hello, and I'm David Baggley, or eekeeboo as many of you know, head of community for World of Tanks West, and here we are today. A quite nice day so far on the landing craft that Richard's mentioned. So I'd like to remind everybody that Twitch drops are live and going on right now, and I'm going to make sure I read everything that's happening. So for 30 minutes you will get 5 × 5 XP victory missions. After 60 minutes you can claim 5 of the following consumables, which is a coffee, a cola and pudding and tea, which everybody likes. And after 90 minutes you have a chance of the following rewards, which is either the premium tanks XM66F, the TS5 or the Ram 2. Alternatively, you can get a Salamander style for the Sheridan, the Major Ram style for the E4, or, and yes, there's plenty more, there's an Overlord 2D style, 3 days of premium or 1 day of premium. Make sure when you're watching you are following all the conditions for Twitch drops, claim them as you go, and you'll receive a nice reward just for tuning into this excellent stream. So, now that we've got everything that out of the way, yeah, lots of Twitch drops going on there, so
There's
I'm
a lot
going to make sure
there, David. So please, at home, settle back, put the kettle on for the next 2 hours or so, and we bring you all the best from not only the museums here, but also the museums in Normandy. We went on a bit of a road trip out there, and we'll also have a closer look with the curator of the D-Day story here in Portsmouth.
So yeah, up next is going to be a build-up focusing on the use of tanks during the operation of Normandy with D-Day. And yeah, hopefully enjoy the video. Let us know, ask any questions in the chat, and we'll sure to pick them up as we go.
By the fall of 1941, the German war machine, fed by the strong economic resources from their occupation of countries throughout Europe, was determined to target Moscow next. The Red Army and the civilians fought back vehemently and suffered enormous casualties. As events unfolded, the creation of a front in Western Europe became as important as ever. It was crucial to disperse the German forces and weaken their economic power. But Western Allied forces couldn't create a full-scale front until 1943. With battles stretching from the Pacific to Africa to this point in World War II, it simply wasn't possible to strike and liberate German-occupied France. Only during the conferences in Casablanca and Tehran in 1943 was the decision made to regroup. As a result, the Normandy landings as part of Operation Overlord was planned for May 1944. The Allies already had experience in similar operations. The first attempt to deploy British and Canadian troops in Western Europe was in 1942 in Dieppe, France. It was an unsuccessful and costly battle for the Allies, one of the reasons being the supporting British tanks that couldn't get there in time. Some of the vehicles were unable to reach the French town due to engineering structures blocking their path and unfavorable road conditions. The Dieppe raid, along with other military actions, especially landing operations, provided the Allies with the experience they later used in Operation Overlord. The Normandy shoreline was a strongly reinforced bridgehead. Back in 1942, the Germans started building the Atlantic Wall, a coastal defense and fortification system. Erwin Rommel, the commander of Army Group B in northern France, understood that the chance of stopping a possible landing with just fortifications was pretty small. This is why he counted on using the reserves of Panzer Group West that were deployed in France along with the fortification structures. The Panzer Group consisted of a big number of units equipped with contemporary vehicles including Tigers and Panthers. The troops were battle-hardened in Africa and on the Eastern Front. The Allied landing was guaranteed to be hard and demanding. In the meantime, the Allies decided on the landing spot. It needed to be close to the British Isles so that the Allied Air Force could efficiently support the landings and engage the Germans. Also, landing heavy vehicles required proper beaches that were suitable for heavy vehicles. The most fitting places were on the coast near Calais, Normandy, and Brittany. The idea of landing in Calais was declined as it was seen as the most obvious. The Germans thought so too. They posted military reserves there, and the region's defensive structure system was reinforced. A risky decision was made. The landing must happen on the Normandy shoreline. However, they were far from ideal for this purpose. The German forces were least expecting to encounter the Allies here, as they reasoned it was impossible to perform long combat operations without the access to infrastructure of a large port. To solve this problem, Allied forces developed artificial mulberry harbors and a piping system to provide fuel straight across the English Channel. Tanks played a very important role in the operation. They would cover the infantry and help with the advance. But how do you deploy vehicles at the same time as the infantry? How could these heavy vehicles traverse the beaches and German engineering structures? The tanks were modified with additional modules for this purpose. The Americans invented deep wading kits to traverse shallow waters. Every hole in the hull and turret sides were sealed to be waterproof, and the air intakes were equipped with special devices. Their upper parts were easy to remove, decreasing the time needed to make the tank battle ready. This helped to considerably increase the maximum forwarding depth. Duplex drive was a more radical modification that converted a tank into an amphibious vehicle. A metal frame was attached to the tank's hull that held a deployable rubbered tarp screen. The screen was raised with the help of rubber tubes filled with compressed air, which made the tank buoyant, and it could move with the help of propellers. It was lowered into the water from the landing ship along with the infantry. The British side decided to focus on the vehicles that could surpass the German engineering structures and defenses. This task was assigned to military engineer Percy Hobart. His inventions were named Hobart's Funnies. One of his most peculiar funnies was the Churchill AVRE. Instead of the standard 6-pounder gun, these vehicles got a 290mm petard mortar with incredible firepower that was meant to destroy reinforced walls. Another of Hobart's funnies was a Churchill modified with a flamethrower that was called the Churchill Crocodile. The flamethrower was mounted instead of the hull machine gun, and the fuel was towed in an armored wheeled trailer. The mine-clearing Crab tank cleared the way for heavy vehicles, and the bridge-laying Churchill Ark helped them cross tough terrain. Almost everything was now ready. However, the weather had to be considered as well. For a successful landing, a good tide was necessary, as landing vessels could be damaged by German underwater defense structures. Also, the British wanted to expand the landing territory. As a result, Operation Overlord was shifted to June 1944. 3 British landing zones were defined: Gold Beach, Juno Beach, and Sword Beach, as well as 2 American ones, Utah Beach and Omaha Beach. The British command allocated a separate tank unit for each zone. Hobart's 79th Armored Division and their funnies were operating on Gold. On June 6, 1944, at 7:25 a.m., hundreds of soldiers of the 1st Battalion Hampshire Regiment heard the ashore command. The tension among the personnel was unbearable. Clenching and squeezing their weapons in anxiety, soldiers approached the shore in the landing vessels through the gusting wind. But the German forces were ready to meet them with heavy fire. The British suffered heavy losses within the first minutes of battle. The duplex drive tanks were landing directly on the beach because of the storm. As soon as the vehicles started supporting the infantry, German defenses in the landing zone were quickly penetrated. Sherman Crabs and other engineering tanks cleared the paths through minefields, and the British forces started advancing deeper into German-occupied France. The tensest events unfolded on Omaha Beach. The 741st, 743rd, and 745th Tank Battalions were supposed to support this zone. 27 out of 29 Sherman DDs of the 741st Tank Battalion sunk while attempting to reach the shore. The commander of the 743rd Tank Battalion decided to land their duplex drive tanks straight on the beach. A part of the 745th Battalion's tanks, along with the command staff, couldn't reach the shore until 10 a.m. on the 7th of June because of the storm and heavy fire. The situation with the Allied forces seemed very dire in some places. The troops were an easy target on the open shoreline, which led to colossal losses. 4,000 men were killed or went missing in action that day on Omaha Beach alone. However, the Germans didn't manage to place their reserves and coordinate the actions of separate units, which played into the Allies' hand. This, along with the work of tankers and the engineering equipment, helped retake and expand the landing zones further and hold the bridgehead. After the Allied landing, their forces would go on to liberate France from German occupation and pierced through western boundaries of Germany despite heavy losses. At the same time, Operation Bagration, a massive Red Army assault, was developing on the Eastern Front, which liberated the Belarusian SSR, the Lithuanian SSR, and part of Poland. From this point onwards, the Allies had the upper hand, and as a result, the end of the Second World War in Europe came much quicker. Operation Overlord was the largest landing operation in history. The great and valiant contributions of the UK, the US, Canada, France, Belgium, Netherlands, Poland, and Norway all played their part in the victory on the Normandy shoreline.
Thank you, everybody, and welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that video. I know the advert unfortunately distracted a couple of people. There's nothing we can do about it. Just stick around and we will show you'll be able to see everything going on. So we're starting with me briefly just first because, as all of you know, we have a D-Day event going on in-game right now, both with a game mode, which all of you can see, and as well as a battle pass, which all of you should be able to see on our D-Day map progression asset. Now, hopefully that will appear on the screen shortly. If not, don't worry. You will be able to be mapped throughout all the activities going on through this historical period. Starting, of course, with our D-Day stream, we have the Battle Pass going on. You'll be able to take part in the Tankfest stream taking place later this month. There will be a keynote as well as some other events that support this activity, including Frontline and other Twitch drop missions with contributors as well. So, now that we've got this, I'm really looking forward to Tankfest, and I know the next person that's going to be joining with us, with Richard, and a guest from the the story, will be able to take you through the next phase.
So now we just want to introduce a very special guest. It's Mr. Andrew Whitmarsh, who's curator of the D-Day story. Andrew, firstly, thank you so much for inviting us on board. Now, perhaps we should begin with the larger story. I mean, Portsmouth, historical home of the Royal Navy, and critical, of course, for D-Day.
Yeah, and the reason the D-Day story is here is because this area played such a big part in D-Day. So actually, it's not just Portsmouth, it's also a much wider area. So just further to the west is Gosport, which was another point. So Gosport and Portsmouth, both important points where the troops were loading onto the ships and landcraft to go to Normandy. Further inland, there were lots of, out in the countryside, lots of camps for the troops where they were waiting. And then in the Solent, just on this side of us, so the sea between Portsmouth and the Isle of Wight was where a large part of the naval forces that went to Gold Dune and Sword Beaches were waiting for those for several, a week or so, waiting for the orders for D-Day to be launched. And of course, it was postponed by 24 hours because of the weather. So there would have been a lot of nervous people out there waiting for the orders.
And the secrecy involved must have been, I mean, it begs to, you can't really believe how secretive they were. I mean, you just couldn't see that happening in this day and age, could you? It was impossible.
Yeah, so it was no secret that D-Day was going to happen somewhere at some point, but it was the where and the when that were the two really secret points. But if the Germans had been able to see that fleet assembled, that would have been a big clue, obviously, because where the fleet was assembling would suggest where they're potentially going to in France or wherever it might be. But there were very few German reconnaissance aircraft that managed to make it over here and get back because the Allied defences were so strong. So that really made it harder for the Germans to figure out what was going on. And then there's the Allied deception plan as well, which is really fascinating. So basically suggesting that the Allied forces were gathering in the southeast corner of England, so Kent and that part of the world. And that would have suggested, again, for the positioning in the UK, the nearest bit of France, the Pas de Calais, northern France, would be the logical place for the Allies to invade. So, and there's lots of other aspects to that, but basically that was confusing the Germans about where exactly the Allies were going to land.
And the D-Day story itself, we are going to get a chance to have a look around with you later on, which I'm really looking forward to. But how does the background of it, I mean, how did it come to be here in the first place?
So the museum's run by Portsmouth City Council and opened originally in 1984 as the D-Day Museum, and then and was opened because this area played such a big part. It's a moment when the city of Portsmouth and the surrounding area was on the national and international stage, playing as such a vital role, and so the council wanted to commemorate this really and tell the story. And then in 2018 we were revamped as the D-Day story, And that was because we had, so the change of the name reflects the fact there were really big changes, upgrades, improvements to the displays. So now we've got all sort of modern displays you'd expect from a museum these days.
And now perhaps for those that haven't been around for the last couple of days, it's been pretty manic down this area for the last couple of days, hasn't it?
It has. So on the 5th of June, the day before the D-Day anniversary, just over there we had the national commemoration, the UK national commemoration for the D-Day anniversary. So we had the King and the Queen, Prince William and other dignitaries and quite a number of veterans as well taking part in those commemorations. And then actually today, again on Southsea Common just over there, we've had the Portsmouth Armed Forces Day events. So we had the Red Arrows over a few hours ago and parachutists and things like that. So it's been all go. It's a bit quieter out there now.
Just a bit. Now, thank you very much for that. So, as Richard and Andrew both mentioned, we are on the landing craft, and we have a nice, cool video where Richard and Andrew kind of went through this. But Andrew's going to talk you through this next video asset, which should come up on the screen shortly.
So you can see the markings on the front of the LCT, which often people ask about. So H is the squadron, 17 is the flotilla, so 2 units that it was part of, and then obviously LCT 7074 is the number. So LCTs didn't have names because there were so many of them, they just had numbers, and LCT stands for Landing Craft Tank. So here we can see our Sherman tanks. This is a Sherman Grizzly, so the Canadian variant, and you can see the 7th Armoured Division marking on the front there. So this is representing a Sherman tank, an armoured observation post tank that we know was on this particular LCT on D-Day. This LCT carried 10 tanks and landed them on Gold Beach. In fact, not on D-Day itself, but on the 7th of June in the end, because things were running slightly late. But the troops carried by this LCT were part of the follow-up forces, so they weren't meant to assault the beach and capture it at the start of D-Day. They were coming along to kind of continue the offensive and push further inland. And here you can see our Churchill Crocodile tank. This one, both the tanks are ones owned by the museum, so they don't have a particular connection with this craft as such. Yeah, LCTs would have carried Churchills definitely amongst lots of other craft. And the Churchill Crocodile, of course, is the flamethrower variant. So you can see at the back of it there, the pipe coming out the back, which would have connected to a trailer, which we don't have, but that would have carried the fuel for the flamethrower. And then this is the engine room of the LCT, so obviously the engines aren't there anymore, but it's where that's where the 2 engines would have been. As you can see, we've got some displays about the history of the LCT, and the drawing here just gives you a bit of a sense of how packed these landing craft were. Obviously, they would need to mass as much kit as possible to move over there. This is the crew space, so you can see the hammocks where people would have the crew would have slept. And the markings there, it says Concept, a bit hard to read, but that's the name of the company that made the steel. So the components of the LCT were made by a number of different companies and then brought to one site, to Hebburn on the River Tyne, in fact. This particular LCT was made. And it was actually made only months before D-Day. So the Allies needed as many landing craft as possible, so they were building them right up to the last moment. And then here what you can see, this is all shots inside the wheelhouse, and now the wardroom, so where the second in command slept and the 2 officers could relax in, and you can see the galley. So you can see there's some sort of facilities for the crew, but it is fairly basic. And this was the commanding officer's cabin, so you had slightly better conditions, but still it is fairly primitive. And then now we can see a really important feature. So this is the winch that's on the stern of the LCT. And on the pad, you can see just in the background there would have been an anchor which the crew would have dropped as the LCT was approaching the beach. And that was a way of winching it back off the beach to get back out to sea again. Because obviously when a landing craft is on a beach, it's essentially run aground, which is exactly what you normally want to avoid. The craft has got 2 20mm Oerlikon guns, you can see here. So they're used for anti-aircraft defence and defence in general.
So thank you very much for that one. Sorry, yeah, Richard is
Andrew, I have to say, there's one point there that you told me on a last visit here. It was a nightclub at one stage of its life, and that absolutely fascinates me.
Yeah, so this is the reason it survived to this day. There were thousands of LCTs built in World War II in general, and over 800 used for carrying troops on D-Day, on and after D-Day. But then after the end of World War II, they obviously didn't need that huge numbers anymore, so most of them were scrapped. But yeah, this one was converted into a nightclub. First, the Master Mariners Club in Liverpool, and then a nightclub. But that meant it kept on being used, and people were still looking after it. It's now owned by the National Museum of the Royal Navy, who've saved the LCT and rescuing it back in 2014. And now, in partnership with them, we have it as part of our museum, so the public can, as well as seeing the museum, which, as you said, we'll see in a minute, they can actually look around the LCT. And so this is all like one big historic artifact, pretty much. So there's a few bits that are replica because they've been removed, but most parts of this landing craft are actually the original metal that was, made in 1944. The troops would have actually walked these decks, so it's really great to have as part of our experience.
Brilliant. And you mentioned the crocodile there, and we will be going down on deck later with Andrew again, actually to have a closer look at that crocodile. But for now, let's go back inside, and Andrew has kindly agreed to show us around the D-Day story.
So this first gallery is all about preparations for D-Day. So it's starting at the point, why was D-Day necessary? How did the Allies put the plan together? So things like the choice between Normandy and Pas-de-Calais. So there's really early stages of the plan, like where do the Allies actually land? And then as the plan goes on in building up in more detail. So this is partly just to orientate visitors so they get a sense of the overall picture of D-Day if they're not familiar with it, because obviously it's a pretty complicated and multifaceted story.
Absolutely, yeah.
All these displays were revamped in 2018 when we had a big refurbishment. So as you can see, they contain things like films and interactives, as well as lots of objects. So the objects are really important because they're obviously the artifacts that survive from World War II. So that's a massive part of the story. But we're also trying to tell the story through a variety of ways. So the objects, but also the films, interactives, etc. And then this next section we're in is a variety of things, but looking at how people joining the armed forces. So obviously lots of people in World War II weren't professional soldiers, sailors or airmen or women, and they joined the armed forces during wartime. So it's just sort of capturing their experiences of these sort of massive life-changing experiences of going into the armed forces, etc. And then the Allied forces sort of starting to gather as D-Day draws nearer, and then as the troops start to embark at places like Portsmouth, but also lots of other places along the south coast, there's moments when civilians and the troops meet and interact. The civilians generally knew, or everyone really knew D-Day was coming, but no one knew exactly where it was going to happen or when it was going to happen. So the local people were aware that the armed forces were going to be doing something really big on their behalf, a really big operation. So they were sort of rare sort of acts of kindness and meetings.
We're going to look at, I know throughout the live stream, some of the more personal items that you've got in here. And these for me really make it. I mean, it's the story of the people. So absolutely fascinating, these things. But we'll hear more about that later.
Yeah, sure. And then the rest of this gallery is also about other aspects of the preparations to D-Day, including, for example, some of the specialist equipment that's prepared, like landing craft, including LCTs, and we'll talk about that, of course. The one
and this
here.
Monstrosity.
Yeah, so this is our Sherman Beach Armoured Recovery Vehicle. So it's a standard Sherman tank, obviously the turret removed and this coaming put on so it could wade into deep water to rescue bogged down vehicles or landing craft. And when we were talking about this earlier, I think it's quite funny really, because we think this is one of our star exhibits because they're quite rare. There were about 60 or so made especially for D-Day, operated by REME. But you had a slightly different
I just think it's the most ugliest vehicles I've ever seen in my life. It's just a very personal opinion, of course.
Maybe both could be true.
Exactly, yeah. Do you know anything about the history of it, where it came from? Or?
We don't, unfortunately. I think probably almost certainly used at Normandy because they were converted for Normandy, but we don't know exactly where it was used. After the war, it was actually used at a local scrapyard. This was a few decades back when they had things like Bren carriers stacked in piles because they had so many that they were disposing of, and they actually used this vehicle, this tank, to move other vehicles that were being scrapped around and generally kind of tidy the place up. So it's got a local history as well as its normal.
Thank heaven somebody identified it in the historical importance of it, really, so saved it.
And then we've got Other aspects displays here. So this side we've got displays about occupied France and also the German forces in Normandy. So we're, although a lot of the space here is talking about the from the Allied perspective, when we're putting the displays together, we were keen that it puts other national perspectives. Yeah. So obviously the experience of the French people under German occupation, under the Nazi occupation, was it's quite hard for us to imagine UK not having been occupied. And then we also touched on what it was, who were the German forces in Normandy. Obviously, like one important fact is not all of the German, for example. They had a range of different experiences. So some of them had been to the Eastern Front at some point. Some had just been in Normandy. So we touched on some of those here.
I absolutely love this, Andrew, I have to say.
And so yeah, that's great. So this model is not meant to represent a specific beach, although it's sort of more like Omaha Beach because you've got the bluffs here. But it's really just to show different aspects of the beach defences, the obstacles that the Germans had put on the beaches. And then further inland, you had things like wire, minefields, bunkers sighted to fire along the beach, not out to sea. So they were hard for the Allies to shell for the naval warships. And then things like gun positions further inland as well. So it's just to give people a bit of a sense of what
it does, doesn't it? It really works well. It does give you a sense of really what had to go through from landing.
And then another big part of the preparations was a very famous one, really, is the Mulberry Harbours and also Pluto. So we've got a couple of examples of models and things like that, and a real section of Pluto. Again, I think this is something we can talk about later on, maybe. But there was, with Pluto and the Mulberry Harbours, a huge effort that was put into a sort of engineering and construction effort to develop and assemble and build all of the equipment that was needed. And so it's another big part of the story.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in this whole gallery, it would go from individual stories of individual people joining the armed forces or individual civilians meeting the troops before they were going off to Normandy, to these kind of massive scale preparations across the whole of the Allied forces, like developing and building the Mulberry Harbours.
And the thought behind it, the engineering, incredible.
Because it really shows how a massive operation D-Day was, the length of the preparations for it, etc.
This is lovely, Andrew.
Yeah, so this is a duck amphibious truck. As you know, it can both go on land, so it's got the wheels here, but also propeller at the back here, so it can operate in the water. So again, as you'll know, really important for helping unload. Maybe not, well, they were used on D-Day, but increasingly after D-Day, because the duck could swim out to a ship offshore, you could unload directly into the duck, and then it could go on land, and then rather at the water's edge having to unload from a boat onto a lorry, which obviously took time, the duck could just drive straight ashore to a dump a few miles inland, offload its cargo. And so it was all about one of many measures the Allies took to try and speed up the whole process of unloading. Because it was obviously a race against time for the Allies moving supplies by sea, the Germans moving their forces by land. And so it's, anything could speed it up was really important. So this film features 6 different characters in the 24 hours before D-Day. So some of them know that D-Day's coming in the next day. Some of them have less information because they're more junior. But it's capturing their sort of inner thoughts, the tension that everyone knew that D-Day was coming soon, even if they didn't know the full picture yet. And so there's a lot of people just wanting things to get going, to get happening.
I have to say I watched the entirety of this video and I was so impressed. The whole thing for me, the personal stories, and like you say, not being aware. You know that something big is about to happen, but having no idea really what it is. Quite incredible.
This gallery is all about D-Day, with the naval and air forces and airborne operations, for example. So in the airborne case, for example, over there's one of the Rupert dummies, the parachute dummies that were dropped away from where the real airborne landings were happening to distract the Germans and try and draw off troops. That's a quite interesting part of the story. And then here we've got an LCVP, so Higgins boat, the famous American made landing craft. So this was about the smallest type of landing craft that there was. And you can just get a glimpse of the film we've got playing on it, which basically features some troops on the LCVP rather, just sort of their thoughts shortly before they're going into land. Obviously, really, well, terrifying is probably the best word for a moment. And then display cases about each of the different beaches. So we're not just telling the British story, we're telling the whole, as much as we can, the whole story. All the 5 different landing beaches, plus the airborne troops landing on either side.
And it must have been incredibly hard to curate all this. Like you say, you're telling the story of everybody. So to try and
yeah, I mean, D-Day is such a huge story.
Exactly.
That it isn't literally possible to tell everybody's story. So, but we just tried to cover as many different angles as possible. And then here we've got a section about how D-Day was reported, etc., and aspects like that, because news got back to the public fairly quickly. Not necessarily the full story, because obviously of secrecy and censorship, but they started getting bits of the picture quite quickly. And now we're into the Battle of Normandy gallery. So the fighting that began on D-Day and then continued over the following months. So we've got our 25-pounder field gun behind us. Obviously, artillery played a really important part for both sides, but the Allies in particular had lots of it. And 25-pounders was a classic British artillery piece that was so important. And then different aspects of the fighting, so some of the different weapons that we used, for example, down to this ventriloquist dummy. So it was taken over by an officer who used it to entertain the troops. So quite a wide range of different objects.
And quite creepy, I have to say.
Well, yeah, some people do have that reaction. I think that when he was being used, the troops probably found him quite entertaining.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it was.
Where do you find the majority of the collection comes from, Andrew? Is it donations from private people, or is it...
Yeah, it's pretty much all our collections, with a few exceptions, but most of them are from either veterans or now obviously increasingly their families. But as a museum, we're really fortunate that people trust us to make their material to us.
Fantastic.
And then it means that for example, when we had the redisplay in 2018, that's what you can see around you, we had a really great range of objects to choose from. And because they're coming from individual people, veterans or their families, hopefully we generally get quite a lot of the story, because it's the story that comes with the object that's really important.
Yeah, of course.
The backstory. If you just have the object by itself, often that leaves more questions unanswered than you actually know. And having that backstory means it's much more meaningful. And then this last section is about the Battle of Normandy. So just trying to sort of sum up the different stages of the fighting. And one of my personal favourites is this map here, which at first glance might not seem that interesting. Okay, it's a map. But the special thing about this map, it was prepared for General John Crocker, who was one of the British Corps commanders for D-Day, commanded the troops who landed on Juno and Sword beaches. And before D-Day, he actually coloured this in by hand himself. So where the contours, the terrain, the high ground, he coloured in himself, which sounds a bit weird, but the reason he was doing that was to get really familiar with the terrain, because obviously as a general fighting over it, he needed to be familiar with the ground. And that was apparently one of the ways that he got familiar with it. And then during the battle, there was an overlay put over it, and each day's troop positions were marked on it. So it was actually used to show a picture of what the state of the fighting at each stage.
Welcome back to this very special D-Day live stream. Firstly, Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time out to show us around the fascinating and very emotive collection.
No problem. Good to have you here.
And I believe, Dave, we've got a couple of questions on Twitch for Andrew.
We do. So of the many questions we've got, the more reasonable ones were, do you have any information, or can you let the audience know how you began or started working at the Story and Museum?
Sure. Well, working in museums in general, I did a history degree and then an MA in military history, and then got a job in a different museum, the Royal Air Force Museum in London, in fact, and then got a job here many years ago. I did a a museum studies MA as well. So it's quite common that people do several qualifications like that in the sort of the hits, like history, for example, and then also some kind of museum or heritage qualification as well. Not always essential, but it's often the way it ends up.
Okay, thank you. And then the second question was, how is it that you come to collect some of your items for the exhibits, or how do you get given them, and etc.? Where do you source them from?
Yeah, so we've the museum, as I said, has been here since 1984, and 40 years. So that was 40 years after D-Day. So there was still a lot of Normandy veterans around, and so we were really fortunate to have been given many items by the veterans. These days, it's more their families rather than the veterans themselves, sadly. But mostly, the items are donated to us, so they're given to us. People offer them to the museum. Occasionally we buy things, but we have very small budgets for that. So generally we're lucky enough to be given them.
Okay, thank you very much. Hopefully that answers a few of your questions, and feel free to ask some more. Try and make them more reasonable if you can, with majority of the ones that came through on Twitch chat. So for the next item, what we have is the embroidery. If you could give us a bit of information about what this is all around before we show the video asset.
So the Overlord Embroidery came to our museum when we opened in 1984, and it wasn't specially made for us. I'll explain a bit, I think, in a moment about how and when it was made. But it's telling the story of the preparations for D-Day, and the Battle of Normandy, and inspired by the Bayeux Tapestry. So I often say it's like a modern-day equivalent to the Bayeux Tapestry, which tells the story of the Norman invasion of this country in 1066. So a different seaborne invasion, many years apart, but actually crossing a similar body of water.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, from what I understand, the video isn't going to cover the whole thing. So if you want to see it all, definitely come and visit the museum.
Come down to Portsmouth, D-Day story.
Visit. But yeah, here's the video that should highlight some of Andrew's words on the key elements.
So this is the Overlord Embroidery, or part of it. It's 34 panels. Each panel is 8 foot wide, 3 foot high. So in total length, 272 feet or 83 metres. It wasn't specially made for us, in fact. It was commissioned by Lord Dulverton of Batsford. The artist who designed it was Sandra Lawrence, and it was made by the Royal School of Needlework. But it came to our museum, which was then known as the D-Day Museum, rather than D-Day Story, when we opened in 1984. So this is one panel, and there's a whole sequence of them going around the room. The Overlord Embroidery is telling the story starting from the start of the Second World War, the preparations lead up to D-Day, and then behind me you can see the 5th to the 6th of June, so the Allied convoys heading across on their way to France, to Normandy. They set off on the 5th of June, most of them, to arrive obviously on D-Day on the 6th of June. And so it gives you some sense of the huge number of ships that would have been involved, all heading across over the horizon. And part of the point of the Overlord Embroidery is that just by looking at the images, it communicates the story. So you don't need to read lots of text, although we do have more text and giving more information about it. But just by looking at the images, you get a sense of the story of D-Day and the Battle of Normandy. So this particular panel shows the airborne troops landing. So we've got an interior of aircraft carrying parachutes, for example. But this scene over on the right here shows the commandos starting to arrive. So they'd land on the beaches and then moved inland to reinforce the airborne troops who'd landed by glider, as you can see, and by parachute. And this figure represents Bill Millen, the well-known bagpiper, with the commandos, with Lord Lovat's commandos who land on Sword Beach. And a quick bit of trivia, when the embroidery was originally made, so it was finished in the early 1970s, he was shown wearing a helmet like the guy to the right. On D-Day, the commandos wore their green berets, the famous symbol of a commando. So to correct that mistake, part of an actual beret was incorporated into the embroidery by the Royal School of Needlework. So it's a little bit of Overlord Embroidery trivia. Here we've got a section of panels of the Overlord Embroidery looking at D-Day, first starting with the German forces. So this shows German troops on the coast of Normandy with their various bunkers and things. Under fire, there's Allied bombers overhead preparing their way for the troops to land as the Allied fleet is just off the coast there. And then we have D-Day, the 5 different beaches as the Allied troops start landing on them. So here we've got the Americans on Omaha and Utah beaches, and then Gold Dune and Sword, the British and Canadian beaches, and you can see British and Canadian troops starting to land here. And even on the end here, part of one of the wartime badges, the TT badge of the British 50th Infantry Division, that's been incorporated into the embroidery. The fabric used for some of the soldiers' uniforms actually is the actual fabric that was used, the material used from the uniforms. They incorporated actual pieces of uniform into the embroidery as well. This scene here shows the Allied leaders arriving in Normandy. Actually, in actual fact, they visited on several different occasions. But so we've got the King, General Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, General Montgomery, the Allied Land Forces Commander, Field Marshal Allenbrook, the Chief of Imperial General Staff, and then British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. The way that the embroidery is made is most of it's made by what's known as applique embroidery, which is essentially taking pieces of material which are stitched onto background material. And so that's how most of it's made. But for the really fine details, like for example, the medal ribbons, for example, some of the badges or some of the details on the faces, they were done just by stitching. So there's two different methods used. One question people ask sometimes is, why is it called the Overlord Embroidery and not the Overlord Tapestry? Because everyone knows about the Bayeux Tapestry. The difference is an embroidery is stitched, whereas a tapestry is woven. Actually, the Bayeux Tapestry is really an embroidery, because the Bayeux Tapestry is also stitched, but it's got mislabeled for some reason. So that's why it's the Overlord Embroidery. And Overlord comes from Operation Overlord, which was the code name for the operations that began on D-Day and then continued for the following months.
And welcome back. Andrew, the Overlord Embroidery, what I really want to get across to people is it's impossible, I think, on a video to give you that sense, that feeling that you get when you're actually looking around there. And then certainly, you know, I was very privileged to have a look around the whole embroidery. It is remarkable, absolutely remarkable.
Definitely, and there's definitely people who visit our museum thinking, I'm not sure quite how an embroidery fits into the military museum, but I've literally seen people walk into the room, see it, and go, wow, because it's so striking when they initially see it. Yep. And there's lots of history in there as well. So you know, you can look at it from the point of view of how it's made, embroidery techniques, if that's your thing. But also there's a lot of history. There's a lot of scenes are based on well-known photographs. So occasionally you'll recognise a scene that's in there.
I put my hands up. I didn't realise until the video the difference between an embroidery and a tapestry. So thank you for that particular nugget.
Glad we all learned something.
Yeah, all of Twitch chat is going to be happy now that they know the difference.
That's what I'd expect.
Yeah. And so, of course, the 60 minutes for Twitch drops are up, which I'm going to talk you through now. So if you're just joining the stream, welcome, hello. I hope you're enjoying the stream so far. So after 30 minutes, you'll be able to claim 5 times 5 XP victory missions. Now, you should have been able to claim your 5 coffee, your 5 cola, and your 5 pudding and tea. Stick around for another 30 minutes, and you'll be able to start claiming your drop prize, which will be random based on either the XM66F premium tank, the TS5 premium tank, the Ram 2 premium tank. Alternatively, you can earn a 3D style, which is called the Salamander for the Sheridan, the Major Ram style for the E4, or a 2D style called Overlord, which many of you should be very familiar with. Alternatively, you can get 3 days of premium or 1 day of premium, which, as you can see from there, there's plenty of rewards going around. All you got to do is watch, be eligible, and make sure you hit that claim button. So thank you very much for all of that, and sorry for the quick intermission with Twitch drops. Welcome back, Richard. So can you tell us a little bit more about what's going on here?
Yeah, so earlier on in the video, we mentioned Hobart's Funnies, of course, those ingenious, specially adapted tanks and mine clearance machines that were used on the Normandy beaches. Now, let's take a closer look at one, beginning with certainly my favourite, I feel, the Churchill Crocodile, and it also features, of course, as one of our in-game Battle Pass vehicles.
This Battle Pass season, we take a closer look at 3 very special vehicles, starting off with the Churchill Crocodile, a historically inspired Tier 6 British premium tank. First off, let's head to the Tank Museum in Bovington with Richard the Challenger Cutland to see the great example up close.
It's one of the most famous of Hobart's Funnies, and few Allied vehicles struck fear into the heart of the German infantryman more than this, the Churchill Crocodile. Built on the chassis of the reliable, heavily armoured Churchill infantry tank Mark VII, the Crocodile flamethrower was a fearsome weapon in the Allied arsenal. The flamethrower conversion kit was able to be fitted by the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers in the field. The design was simple and relatively straightforward, and the fantastic thing was, it meant that the Mark VII could retain its 75mm gun, the main armament, and also the 7.92mm Beezer machine gun. This seemed like the perfect weapon for D-Day, ideal for clearing the German fortifications on the beaches. However, to be effective, they had to get there first. As it turned out, only 6 Crocodiles were deployed in the initial assault waves on D-Day. These were 13 and 15 troop of 141st Regiment of the Royal Armour Corps on Gold Beach. The 3 crocodiles of number 15 troop all became casualties in a few minutes after leaving the landing craft tank. One sank in the rough sea, one became stuck in a deep crater on the beach, and the third threw a track after attempting to scale a beach obstacle. The 3 from number 13 troop fared better. Although one was lost in a deep crater at sea, the other 2 managed to get to shore safely.
In the game, Churchill Crocodile has excellent survivability. Even if the enemy is able to penetrate this tank, it has an ample hit points pool. The tank's frontal armor boasts an average of 150 millimeters of effective armor, even in the lower plate, which is respectable for a Tier 6. When facing opponents of its own tier or lower, the Crocodile can deflect shells even without cover. The armor's best feature is its 95mm sides. The side-scraping Crocodile is a real bunker. Enemies have to pick at its armor and HP for a long time. And all the while, you're picking back. This Crocodile makes good use of its fast reloading gun. Its main advantage lies in damage per minute, which should be enhanced whenever possible. A rammer and pudding with tea are desirable, with the latter being deemed necessary by the crew. It's always preferable to trade one enemy shot for 2 of your own, provided the terrain allows for it. Our British tank is a bit too proud to lower its gun. Hit a curb? Well, you're now relegated to shooting at birds. In flat urban locations, however, gun depression should be the least of your worries. The tank's mobility. Well, let's just say it's aptly named after a reptile with short legs for a reason. Its power-to-weight ratio doesn't even reach 10 crocodiles per ton. Makes you wonder if you're driving backward. However, with the turbocharger, the Crocodile can accelerate to a blazing 30 kilometers. Just be careful with turns at such speeds. The Churchill Crocodile is the tank for those who relish high DPM and thrive on the front lines. While it may not win a sprint at 100 meters, it is built to excel in the marathon of tank battles.
Welcome back to this very special D-Day live stream. You've probably noticed that we've moved down from the upper bridge. Am I saying, is it bridge we've moved down from, Andrew?
The bridge is higher up, so we were next to the wheelhouse.
I stand corrected. And we're now in front of the Churchill Crocodile. Now, fantastic example of a Churchill Crocodile, Andrew. Where on earth did this come from?
This particular one came from the local scrapyard, Pound Scrapyard, which, going back a few decades, had huge numbers of World War II vehicles in, which were quite sadly now, as if we talk about it, we were being scrapped. There's tales of things like Bren carriers piled high and all that kind of stuff, which is no longer around, most of it. But this came from there. So we don't know it's World War II history, sadly.
But what you've done is you made it, I mean, certainly the backstory, who it belonged to, etc. You've made it fit to that time period. Yeah, so it represents a tank that was commanded by Major John Sherman of the 141st Regiment Royal Armour Corps, who landed on D-Day, and he won the MC, the Military Cross, for his actions in Normandy after D-Day, and that MC was donated to our museum quite a long time ago now. So we don't currently have it on display, as it happens to have in the past. So basically, it's in the markings of his particular tank. So that there weren't many tanks. I think there were 6 from his regiment that landed on D-Day on Gold Beach, which is actually the same beach as the tanks that were on this particular LCT landed on. So they landed as part of the assault. I think it's about 45 minutes after H-hour, after the troops started landing. And the rest of the regiment came along, I think it was several weeks later, and took part in the fighting. Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Andrew. And that's just one, obviously, the Churchill Crocodile, just one of Hobart's funnies. Now, what we're going to do is go across to one of our favourite museums, that and the D-Day story, of course, Andrew, and we're going to catch up with the education officer, Mr. Chris Copson, to look at a few more of Hobart's funnies.
What we have here is the last surviving intact example of Sherman DD. DD means duplex drive. I'll go into that in a moment. But what this is all about is how you get armour onto a defended beach at an early stage. Now, most people have seen the first 20-odd minutes of Saving Private Ryan. It is potentially the most difficult and dangerous military operation you can imagine, because the other guy is going to be sat there in his bunker looking at you through a weapon sight. Getting tanks on at an early stage might save you a lot of that grief. But it's a question of how to do it. And what this is all about is how you make 25 tons of metal float and swim. Now, the screen itself increases the displacement of the tank. So it's almost like hanging under a boat. Rubberized canvas, it's supported on the inside by inflatable tubes and scaffolding. And suddenly you have actually got a tank that floats. It doesn't float that well, that black line. That's the amount of freeboard you've got. So in a rough sea, frankly, this is not going to work, as a lot of people found out. One wave over the top, that's going to go down. That's one element. The other element is around the back here. And what this is all about is you can make it float, but it needs to be able to get along. It needs to be able to swim. So at the back, we have two propellers, and they are actually driven off the tracks. Now, there's a bit of a problem here. The transmission, the final drive of the tank is actually at the front. And they're wondering, this is going to be complicated. How do we get power back to these things? They came up with a very simple solution. They fitted an extra sprocket wheel. So the tracks are now fully powered, and the tracks power the propellers. So far, so good. Something over 1,000 of these things were built. Whether they worked or not is very much down to sea conditions. This will just about cope with a slight swell. And if the sea is worse than that, like I say, it'll sink. So quite a lot were actually able to land on the British beaches on Gold, Juno and Sword. DDs by and large came ashore, and some were landed from tank landing craft, some actually swam ashore, quite a few actually swam ashore. On the American beaches, it's a far more varied picture, because a lot of their DDs were landed too far out. The sea was rougher, and about half of their DDs actually foundered and sank. Fortunately, most of the crews were actually picked up. But when they do get there, the result is remarkable, because of course, in the sea, this doesn't look like a tank. It looks like a little brown boat. You're a German gunner. You've got the ultimate target-rich environment in front of you. You've got destroyers, LCTs, LCIs dashing about, lots of other stuff happening. You more or less disregard this. It's a secret weapon. You don't know it's coming until it gets to the beach. And then the crew fire the explosive bolts, the screen drops, and you suddenly realise there's a tank about to put a 75mm round through the slit of your pillbox. For that reason, it works. They managed to land probably 100% more armour at a very early stage, and it makes a huge difference to the way the invasion went. As we've said before, getting ashore on an enemy-occupied beach is a very, very difficult, hazardous operation. The enemy will have prepared the beach. There will be a mass of obstacles. There'll be pillboxes. There'll be guns that are configured to fire down the length of the beach to enfilade vehicles that are landing. So you're going to need all the help you can get. The British Army had a very specialised unit, 79th Armoured Division. That charging bull is their insignia. 79th Armoured is odd. It never fought as an armoured division. It's a holding unit for a whole mass of very strange specialised vehicles. Its commanding officer was a guy called Percy Hobart, Major General PCS Hobart. These things collectively are known as Hobo's Funnies. This is one of the most useful. This is the AVRE, the Assault Vehicle Royal Engineers. Now, in the British Army, we call engineers sappers, and this is a sapper's Swiss Army knife. it solves all sorts of problems for you. Looking at it, it's a basic Churchill tank, but the gun has been replaced with what we call a petard mortar, and that fires a very large capacity round. It's only a short range weapon, but the round is so big, they actually call it the flying dustbin. And that is incredibly useful for knocking out enemy fortifications, enemy strong points. Something like a pillbox won't stand much chance against one of those. The difficulty with it is you fire around, and then the poor old loader has to climb up from inside and reload it, actually standing on the foredeck, which is a bit hazardous. But that's not all it can do. Petard mortar, it was also used, it carried something called a bobbin, which is it's a track layer, effectively, with a reinforced canvas track. You can use that on soft ground. You can use it to lay a medium girder overbridge, that's a steel bridge. That will take 40 tons, and you can drop that over an anti-tank ditch or a shell hole, anywhere you need to go. It's also a demolition vehicle. It carried a frame with a double onion with a couple of demolition charges on it, and you can drop those on, again, any sort of obstacle that you need to be out of the way. The Churchill is not the fastest tank in the world, but the good things about it, it's heavily armoured and it's very, very good at climbing. If you want a vehicle that can get across rough ground or shingled beaches or something like that, this is the one you want. One of the things you're going to encounter if you're landing on an enemy-occupied beach, trying to make your way through layered defences inland, is almost certainly mines. And the German Atlantic Wall, both on the beaches and further into the landing grounds, is very heavily seeded with mines. Now, there's two solutions here. Either you can get suicidally brave assault pioneers to try and dig the things up by hand using a metal detector. That's not a very nice job at all. Or you can come up with something like this. Now, what this is a Sherman Crab. And as you can see, back there, it's a perfectly ordinary M4A4 Sherman tank built in the US at the Detroit Tank Arsenal. But then over in the UK, it's been converted to set off mines. And you've got this apparatus on the front. Now, the first time the British Army really encounters mines in large numbers is in the Western Desert in North Africa. And the desert is an ideal place to lay mines. Very, very easy to put them down in big fields. We came up with a prototype there, something called the Matilda Scorpion. That's a little bit the same as this. It has a rotating drum on the front and weighted chains underneath, but it doesn't work for a couple of reasons, one of which is that in the desert, if you try using one of these things, you disappear in a colossal dust cloud and you can't see where you're going. They made a lot more sense for use in Normandy and Northwest Europe. Now, as I said, you've got a powered drum on the front. The chains have weights on the end. I'm told if you knock one of those into your shins, it's very, very painful, something the crew complained about. And they're actually fitted in a spiral fashion. So as the drum rotates at 750 RPM, they're not going to miss anything. The wheels either side are designed to cut through barbed wire, and the Crab was designed to either drop marker posts or smoke grenades in order to actually mark the path through the minefield. This is a very dangerous job. You've actually got to go through the minefield to create a decent path through it. Three of you, that sort of formation, have got to go through it at walking pace. Go any quicker, you will miss one, and it'll detonate under the tank. But the Crabs were really quite useful, very successful. This is a way of clearing through an enemy minefield while incurring minimum casualties. And the other thing, of course, is it's still got its original 75mm gun. So it's done clearing mines, it can function as a gun tank and provide fire support for your infantry.
And welcome back, everybody, and thank you once again to Andrew, who will return at the end of the stream. But yeah, so we already heard that your favourite of the Hobart's funnies is the Churchill Crocodile. What about it? What is it you like?
There's something about, I like the Churchill for a design anyway. And do you know what I love about the whole thing about Hobart's funnies is the fact that I mean, obviously a very clever man, but the problem was there, and adapting and overcoming for the problem. But I mean, in particular for the Crocodile, you know, to leave the main armament in place. Again, huge kudos to the crews of these things, because you know, the idea of travelling around in this incredibly slow vehicle with a fuel container on the back is just not to be relished at all. But it's the whole thing, I think, about the Hobart's Funnies, how he overcame it with, you know, relatively straightforward designs, but really cleverly put into action.
Yeah, I really like. I know we were talking about this yesterday with the linkage to the carrier pattern, how clever and weird and funky that was, but. Yeah, it was an amazing piece of engineering. Now, mine, of course, and some people are going to say this is a bit of British bias, but I love the Churchill AVRE because of the ludicrous nature of just lobbing something so big at something.
British bias.
Yeah, some British bias going on there. So now we've gone through some of Hobart's Funnies, but up next is another key piece of equipment that was used to get vehicles and part of the Normandy landings.
We're now looking at the airborne element of Operation Overlord of the D-Day invasion. Now, everybody thinks about landing on the beaches, but of course you do have paratroops landing just inland to secure particular objectives. I'm thinking about things like Pegasus Bridge, and also to secure the flanks. The problem with paras is they are lightly armed. They're basically infantry. They come across against armour, they are going to lose. So any support you provide to the paras is going to be a good thing. The trouble is, it's very difficult to actually make a tank airborne. But we've done our best here. These are the remains of a Hamilcar glider, and inside it is a Tetra light tank. And this particular one, it's an unusual little vehicle. It actually steers, it's got big wheels, it steers by actually warping its tracks. It bends its tracks to actually get around corners. And this has, originally it would have had a 2-pounder gun. It's been replaced with a 3-inch close support howitzer. There are only about 20 of these things made. I don't think they were particularly effective, but it is providing just a bit of extra support for airborne troops undertaking a very, very hazardous mission.
And welcome back. So far we have in this live stream really concentrated on the Allies, of course, and what they were using during the Normandy campaign. But what might they have come up against? What might have they been facing in the Normandy campaign? Well, to find out, and two of the most popular German-designed vehicles, we're going to go back to Chris Copson at the Bovington Tank Museum.
One of the vehicles that was very, very successful in Normandy and the subsequent campaign in Northwest Europe is this. This is the Stug III, the Sturmgeschütz III. And this is a German tank killer. Sturmgeschütz means assault gun, but this effectively, it's not an assault gun anymore, it is a tank killer, it's a Panzerjäger. And it's also, the German army is short of resources, German industry is creaking at the seams. It's a way of making the most of existing resources because it's based on the hull and mechanicals of an obsolete tank, the Panzer III. But what they've done is take the turret off the top, put this low superstructure on it, and then mount a 75mm gun on the front. Now, the advantage this has, particularly in somewhere like Normandy, where you're in the bocage countryside, the sight lines, the arcs are very limited. This can sit there, hold down, wait for you to come to it, knock you out, and then retreat rapidly. So it's absolutely ideal. It might look as though it's in slightly ropey condition. It's actually in very original condition. It's never been repainted. It's never been messed with. And the hull itself, and this is very rare indeed, is covered with original Zimmerit. Zimmerit is a paste that's applied. It's textured. This is what we call waffle Zimmerit. And it's designed so that magnetic mines don't actually stick to the tank. There's no contact, so they fall off. That's something the Wehrmacht came up with in Russia. It's not done for very long, really 1943 into 44, but it's very nice that this actually has its original Zimmerit coating. It makes it a very, very rare survivor indeed. The Stug is credited with having the most tank kills of any vehicle of the war. Like I say, it's low, it's deadly, it's very effective.
And welcome back. Now, myself and David, one thing that took our breath away when we came on this landing craft tank was the sheer scale of it. And what I think it's impossible to do is almost get to the feel of it by just purely through camera.
No. It was something that Michael, of many of you who's hiding right now, has said, is that he always thought it was the same size you see from famous movies that are there. So what we're going to do is actually try and show you just how big this craft is. And it's going to take us a while to get over there. So what was the thing that stood out to you with this vehicle when you saw it for the first time?
I think I just said, well, the sheer scale of it, because obviously, like you say, I think in movies, you know, in popular culture, what you think of landing craft is a lot smaller, you know, a lot more compact or something. And this is, you know, this is vast. If you see, I mean, there's a Sherman here, you know the size of the Churchill Crocodile, and you can see the space in between there. And as well, I also thought, I mean, I'm not a naval man, I'm obviously a tanky at heart, but again, actually traveling on this, I mean, I have certainly not got sea legs. I get sick just looking at water sometimes. So the thought of travelling all the way across to the beaches on Normandy, not knowing what you're facing on this as well. And also, you know, the skipper on this, the captain, 20 years old apparently, which is just remarkable.
Yeah, no, I don't think I even knew what I was doing at that age, let alone doing one of these ships. So yeah. So yeah, what have we got next?
So what we're going to do now is we're going to catch up with our friends at the Musée de Blonde. Now, they have a very exciting project coming up. More about that later. But for now, we're going to go across to Adrian for a brief intro to their museum.
Welcome to the French Tank Museum. We are based in Saumur, next to the River Loire. Our museum is home to 200 vehicles, from World War I to nowadays. We have one of the most exciting exhibitions in the world. Half of the museum is on the World War I and World War II. And we still have exciting beasts from 80 years ago, even tanks from the D-Day and Normandy campaign. We also show the monsters of the Cold War era and some of the newest French tanks, even the Leclerc.
And welcome back. Saumur, I have to say, one of my favourite museums to visit. David, I believe you've never been.
No, unfortunately not. And you keep telling me all these weird and wonderful things that go on there. Their amazing collection and just how big it is that they have there. And
it is an incredible collection. I mean, AMX collection, you know, bar none, it is the best in the world that you're going to see the AMX up there as well. And also, I have to mention that Saumur itself, the region, is absolutely beautiful. So, yes, highly recommend.
Okay.
Highly recommend it.
Maybe one day. Hopefully one day.
Now, going back to Saumur, I did mention earlier on that they're carrying out this very special project at the moment. I don't want to give too much away. I'll leave that up to, we're going over to the museum's Deputy Director, Commander Ariane.
Bienvenue dans la salle d'exposition du Tigre I du musée des blindés de Saumur. À l'occasion de sa restauration, le musée des blindés a décidé de présenter au public le Tigre I démonté au fur et à mesure qu'il est traité par les ateliers du musée de Saumur et par les prestataires qui vont travailler sur ce char. Vous pouvez voir ici les pièces majeures du char, la caisse bien sûr, avec ses chenilles, la tourelle et son armement principal qui ont été démontés de façon à ce que l'on puisse voir plus facilement toutes ces pièces du char mythique que l'on ne voit la plupart du temps que en photo. Dès l'entrée, vous pouvez constater une différence entre le numéro porté sur la caisse, le numéro 221, et celui représenté sur la grande image à côté, le numéro 114. Cette différence s'explique parce que le numéro 221 a été posé bien après la fin de la guerre pour redonner une peinture plus neuve au char, alors que les différentes études réalisées à l'occasion de la restauration ont permis de retrouver le numéro initial du char, le numéro 114. Donc maintenant, nous connaissons toute l'histoire de ce char 114, depuis son expédition en Normandie pour participer à la bataille de Normandie, jusqu'à sa récupération par des résistants français qui l'ont utilisé ensuite dans la campagne de France, jusqu'en Allemagne, où il est resté quelques années pour études, avant de revenir en France, d'être encore étudié et de finir au musée des blindés. Ce qui rend ce char exceptionnel n'est pas visible en ce moment, puisque ce char est le dernier de sa production à avoir toujours son moteur d'origine. Donc le moteur n'est pas présenté dans l'exposition, mais ce qui est disposé ici permet de comprendre d'autres éléments particuliers de la conception de ce char Tigre. Vous avez ici bien visible le train de roulement avec ce système particulièrement complexe de galets disposés sur plusieurs profondeurs que l'on peut ici bien voir avec les chenilles démontées et qui fait vraiment comprendre toute la difficulté de la manœuvre qu'il pouvait exister à chaque fois que les équipages des chars devaient démonter, changer les chenilles ou faire des opérations d'entretien et de maintenance. Tout le système qui est lié à l'échappement et au moteur qui est démonté ici permet de se faire une idée de l'épaisseur du blindage du char, y compris sur les parties arrière qui ne sont pas forcément les plus vulnérables, permettent de comprendre pourquoi ce char était particulièrement résistant et a pu impressionner ainsi les troupes alliées qui y étaient opposées à ce char et qui justifie sa réputation de char quasiment indestructible. Au cours de la restauration, on profite pour reproduire quelques morceaux qui étaient manquants. Vous pouvez voir ces tôles ici qui n'ont pas été repeintes et qui ont été refaites à partir de tôles existantes. Et qui montrent que la vie du char, même si celui-ci est un exemplaire particulièrement complet, n'a pas été sans aléas et sans pertes malgré tout, qu'aujourd'hui on s'emploie à restituer, tout en laissant une différence entre les pièces réellement d'origine et celles qu'il a fallu ajouter pour les compléter. Grâce aux éléments qui ont été récupérés après la Deuxième Guerre mondiale, notamment chez des ferrailleurs, on dispose de quelques pièces de rechange, comme ici cette rotule pour l'armement secondaire, qui permet de bien se faire une idée de l'épaisseur du blindage. Ce blindage très épais qui vient compenser le peu d'angle qui est donné à la caisse et qui est compensé donc par l'épaisseur de métal. Après sa sortie d'usine, le char 114 est tout d'abord envoyé aux Pays-Bas, puis il rejoindra la côte normande dans le cadre des renforts envoyés pour s'opposer au débarquement allié sur les côtes normandes. Et c'est là où il subira son principal fait de guerre, qui sera aussi sa fin du côté allemand, puisque la colonne dans laquelle il se déplace subit une attaque britannique. Le premier char est à l'arrêt, Le char 114 qui suit rentre dans ce premier char. C'est finalement un accident de la route provoqué par l'attaque anglaise, et l'équipage qui occupe le char n'a pas le temps de le détruire ou d'essayer de s'écarter de la colonne. Il est très rapidement fait prisonnier. Donc le char est ensuite simplement poussé, dégagé dans le fossé pour laisser la route libre aux autres troupes qui doivent circuler. Et il restera quelques semaines dans cet état jusqu'à être récupéré par des militaires français, l'escadron Beignet, qui a décidé de récupérer du matériel allemand, de le retaper, le remettre en état, de manière à le réutiliser au sein de troupes françaises pour la libération de la France. Pour assurer la restauration de ce char, le musée des blindés a lancé une grande campagne de crowdfunding qui a eu un succès assez impressionnant. Nous étions les premiers heureux de ce succès, puisque la campagne a commencé à la fin du mois de novembre, et dès la fin du mois de décembre, nous avions atteint la somme nécessaire pour garantir une remise en état du moteur. La campagne continue. Pour l'instant, nous avons plus de 2250 donateurs. Nous avons récolté plus de 260 000 euros, mais toute participation permettra d'améliorer la présentation future du char et de garantir son entretien pendant les années qui viennent. Donc, il est encore possible de participer à la longue vie et à la longue histoire de ce char tigre.
And welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the video. I know I certainly did, and I'm sure everybody in Twitch chat did. So can you give us a little bit more information about this restoration project?
Well, I mean, Ariane, I think, summed it up beautifully there, but what an incredible project. I get super excited, I mean, especially when we're talking about restoration projects, but the Tiger in particular. So, you know, time periods, who knows? I mean, it's obviously a long and lengthy process, but the great thing about Saumur is, you know, they've got everything there as far as we can see. You know, they have all of the parts are ready. It's just the amount of labour that's involved in it, and it really is a project of passion. So absolute hats off to them for taking this on.
So you're making sound somewhere more and more like a place I should visit as well as other people, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Everybody should go.
So it's making such a big deal. Now, of course, the Tiger, as infamous as it was and such a big part it played in World War II, it wasn't one of the primary vehicles, or I don't think they even faced it in Normandy, if I remember correctly.
Initially, yeah. Normandy campaign, yes. D-Day, no.
Yeah. So, of course, we have one of those vehicles coming up next with the VT called the Panzer IV.
In terms of German armour that the Allies would be facing in Normandy, not necessarily on the beaches, but a little bit further inland in the Normandy bocage. That's a very closely hedged area, very small fields, very much not good tank country. But the thing you're most likely to encounter is most likely one of these. Not a Tiger, much less a King Tiger. They were actually comparatively rare, and as an Allied tank crewman, you'd need to be fairly unlucky. But this Panzer IV is the workhorse of the Panzerwaffe. They built 8,500 of the things. This is an Ausführung-D, so it's a tank that was produced early in the war, but it's changed quite a lot. To begin with, it didn't have that gun. These things early on are designed as support tanks, Begleitwagen, and it would have had a short-barreled 75mm gun. That isn't much good against armour, so they swap it out for a higher velocity, long-barreled 75, and it becomes quite a potent tank killer. The other big change you see is a mass of extra armour, because the original Panzer IV doesn't have very good protection. So here you can see on the front, on the glacis, multiple layers of spaced armour. And then around the turret, we've got these things called Schürzen. They're present on the turret here, but they'd also be down the sides. And what they are, they're not very thick, they're fairly sort of thin steel sheet. They were designed to protect against anti-tank rifle rounds, but they're also probably fairly useful against things like bazooka rounds. So the Panzer IV is really the tank that Allied tank crews are most likely to encounter in Normandy. And it might be a pre-war design, but it is still fairly potent. As I said to start with, this is really, it's the workhorse of the Panzerwaffe. Far more of these than Tigers, King Tigers, much less Jagdtiger. 8,500 of them.
This year, we are celebrating the 80th anniversary of the D-Day. 80 years ago, on the beach of Normandy, several thousand, dozens of thousands of people were set ready to invade Normandy on 5 beaches to liberate France and Europe. On these beaches, Utah, Omaha, Gold, Sword, and Juno were set ready hundreds of tanks. The better known are the vehicles that were amphibious, the DD Shermans, for example. Nearly 300 of those were sent to liberate the beaches. But there is other tanks that were on the D-Day on the beaches. Tanks that were not amphibious. And one of them helped the French troops that were set ready for D-Day. This tank is the Centaur. On the evening of D-Day, on one of the 5 beaches in Normandy, there were 177 French people to storm a German position. It was on Sword Beach. It was the 177 soldiers of the Commando Kiefer. Those people were the only French to storm on the beaches that D-Day. They had to take a stronghold named the Casino Stronghold. Really strong position with no tanks. But when they arrived on this point, by no way they had enough firepower to take it. So Kiefer himself had to go on the beach to see if a tank was available. And one of them, a Centaur, could be diverted to help the French. Our Centaur was used in Normandy. Maybe not on D-Day precisely, but we do know it was in Normandy. How we do know it? With this picture. As you can see, this is not its actual painting. Its original painting shows us how it was on D-Day, how it was to be a Centaur. You have markings here, and those markings was to help this vehicle to fire from the ships, to help the landing. And this is the Centaur that was used on Normandy, maybe on D-Day. Centaurs had a powerful gun, 95 millimeters, to send powerful shells, explosive shells, against fortified positions. It was a good tool to make sure the bunkers were possible to kill. And this is why it was Centaurs on the Sword Beach that day when Kiefer and its commandos attacked. It just took some shots from these Centaurs to negate the effects of the stronghold, the Casino Stronghold. That way, Kiefer and his men could leave the beach and rejoin with the Englishmen that took Pegasus Bridge on that same day of D-Day. Here is, in short, a little bit of D-Day, an history with French people on Sword Beach.
And welcome back, and thank you. I hope you enjoyed the video of probably a lesser known vehicle, but still no less important for what it played in the role of D-Day and the Normandy campaign. So yeah, as you know, Twitch Drops campaign, and I hope none of that is picked up on the side.
It's noisy.
That is a very rattly bike that somebody has. So I hope that you so far are having a lot of luck with the Twitch Drops going on. Just to remind you of how that looks right now is that if you watch for 30 minutes, you will get 5 × 5 victory mission XP. If you get 60 minutes, you will get 5 coffee, 5 cola, and 5 pudding and tea. After 90 minutes, which many of you should start coming up on now, we'll get one of the following, which is a premium tank XM66F, the TS5, or the Ram 2 premium tank. Alternatively, the 3D styles of the Salamander style for the Sheridan, the Major Ram style for the E4, or a 2D style called Overlord. Many of you should be familiar with that. Alternatively to that as well, so furthermore, you have the 3 days of premium or a 1 day of premium. So plenty to go around. And yeah, so I heard, Richard, you went on a bit of a road trip recently and had a lot of fun recording.
We did. So a couple of months ago, we embarked on a mini road trip to Normandy in an attempt to bring you the best of that region, a taster of the region, and also some must-visit destinations. And to kick us off, let's take a trip to the Overlord Museum.
Good morning and welcome to Overlord Museum, Omaha Beach. I'm Nicolas Leloup. I'm the president and founder of the museum. The museum was made to show and to share this collection, which is a private collection. Started with my father. He started a long time ago, and most of the parts are coming from the Battle of Normandy and from the battlefield.
Nicholas, first of all, thank you so much for inviting us in. Maybe you can give us a quick tour around the museum.
Yeah, sure, definitely. As you can see here, we start by showing the context and history just before World War II and what was the political context in Europe. And of course, the war declaration with the invasion of Belgium, Netherlands, and also France. Then the museum is showing what happened a few years after with the war declaration. You can see here the resistance from France, which is going to be organized with General de Gaulle. Before to talk about this special room, which is the choice of the beaches to land and the place for landing in Normandy for the Allied to free and to invite, let's say, that's the invasion of the continent and to get freedom back in Normandy.
Now, obviously, it's clear that you're passionate about the subject. Where did this passion come from?
It's a long story. The passion is definitely coming from my father, because I was a young boy when I've seen my father collecting parts, and I was very often with my father collecting in some farms and old companies, some wrecks and vehicles and parts of the Battle of Normandy. So that's where is coming from my passion, and why I decided to build such a museum from Greenfield and locate in Omaha Beach in a place where it's a world-known place.
Yeah.
Definitely. So here you can see we are in a reconstitution of a bunker with a Pak 40. So 7 anti-tank guns like that were in Omaha Beach during the battle.
I have to say, the way it's displayed is absolutely brilliant. It really brings it to life rather than sometimes you see, tank after gun after tank after gun. It really brings it to life here.
Yeah, there's 21 diorama scale 1. And here we start on the scale 1 part of the museum now, which is the D-Day part with the beach and tanks, and also the LCVP and the Higgins boat, which is the boat which win the war.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And you can see also many artifacts on D-Day, H hour, first wave of all the guys who landed with special equipment, special maps, demolition parts.
The larger artifacts, though, prime example, the M4A1. Where did your father get this from?
Yeah, that's an ex-French army. It was delivered just to the French army. But it is, yeah, it's definitely the tank who won the war.
Oh, absolutely, yeah,
And,
yeah. And the land, I mean, not a thing you see every day, the landing craft?
Yeah, landing craft coming from south of France and was in was used also in the French Navy before to be decommissioned and purchased and restored then, because it's a plywood, it's a plywood boat, except the front door, which is a metal door, an armored door.
Have you got a particular favourite in the collection?
I have some favorite some favorite parts later in the visit. We can talk about the favourite. And but I like very much the dioramas. Like here, you have the DMC, the amphibious duck, which is D-Day +3 in Omaha Beach, with the logistic, which is we have kept a large place to logistic in the museum during the battle, which is key for the success of Overlord operation. And on the right side, we have here the 3rd Infantry Division, the Canadian Infantry Division, having a rest just after Juno Beach on the 6th June.
The uniforms, and I mean, where did you find most of the uniforms and things?
Some are from Normandy, like this helmet, and this British 5th and 4th helmets from a tank crew. Driver, a very original, found in near Argentan, in south of Normandy. So yeah, many parts are coming from Normandy. Some were purchased to complete, of course. And as you can see now, we start also another part of the museum, which is more Battle of Normandy. It's not anymore D-Day. It's all the operations of the Battle of Normandy during Overlord. On the left side, you can see also a very famous scene, which is the 12 SS division fighting against Canadians and for liberating Caen and liberating the airfield of Carpiquet near Caen. Typical tanks and fabulous tanks from the Battle of Normandy, and of course the Sherman M4 and the Panzer tank and the Panzer IV, which is exhibited here as a maintenance workshop with the special crane, a gantry crane, which was used for lifting the turret, for making mechanics and repairing Panzer and Tiger tanks, which is the only one exhibited in the world, this one.
It looks fantastic. It's obviously taken some hits at some stage.
Yeah, it took some hits and was damaged, definitely. More vehicles, rare half-track, and this one is the biggest half-track ever made.
Do you know, we were looking earlier and I saw this half-track and I thought, this looks so much bigger than any half-track I've seen before. It's huge.
It's a huge machine. FAMO, the 18-ton FAMO, used for towing Panther and Tiger tanks. 2 for towing a Panther tank and 3 for towing a Tiger. And it was also used for towing the big crane here, and also some trailers, big trailers, and used for the Atlantic Wall to install the big guns. And huge machine. This one was coming from Normandy, from a small company making roadworks and things like that. It was transformed after the war, but it was preserved. And
I say it looks in such good condition.
7,000 hours of restoration.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a long work. Okay, we are more in Goodwood operation now, and with the Panzer IV, more than 700 Panzer IV were used in the Battle of Normandy.
The workhorse of the German army.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. The smaller fighting unit organization in a division, as it is, the fighting guys, the machine guns, officer, and so on. So.
The dioramas are incredible. Is this your idea where it comes from, or?
It's a teamwork with some friends, with an English designer, with a Belgian decoration person who made all the dioramas. It's a teamwork, definitely. Okay, so we are progressing in the Battle of Normandy, because here now we are in Lüttich operation, so 5 to 7 of August in Mortain, in south of Normandy, southwest. And on the right, we have the liberation of Falaise with the 4th Infantry Division Canadians and getting in Falaise from Caen. It's a very famous photos with Ford Mortier. It was a truck from the German army, purchased in 1975, just near the place of the photo. It could be
the actual.
It could be the vehicle of the photo, but we will never know, of course. So we still continue with the 2nd SS Division involved in Mortain operation. And now this is one of the last steps of Overlord operation, because we are now in the place of the Falaise Gap, the Falaise Pocket, where the 7th Army was destroyed, completely destroyed and surrounded by the Allied. And as you can see, German army was still using a lot of horses, not only track vehicles, but logistic was made a lot by using horses. He's here, he's exhibited 60% of the collection.
Oh, wow.
There's still 40% not shown, not exhibited, not restored, so there's still a lot in reserve. And
you need a bigger building, surely.
Yeah, we have some improvements and some extension in mind in the future, definitely. So this vehicle, it's a Overlord B4. It's a big Goliath. It's a remote control vehicle. It was they were able to drop 500 kilo of explosive charge at 2 kilometers by remote. You can drive it, and that's the only one existing in running condition in the world. And I will drive it in mini trucks at the end of May. Yeah, I will drive it. And,
is it good to drive? Is it easy to drive?
No, it's not very. It's not funny, definitely. The museum is showing also a part of the Overlord operation, which was the Air Force, so U.S. Air Force and Royal Air Force, with a lot of artifacts found on the ground. Discovered from by us after crash, like this P-47 motor, like this Messerschmitt Bf-109. We managed to find the family of the pilot of this.
Wow.
We managed to find the history of most of the parts here, so it's really powerful as a testimony of the battle.
Absolutely,
And one of the last part is this gallery of the museum, which is a gallery of anonymous heroes made by Jan Patrick, because his father was involved in the Battle of Normandy in US Air Force as a mechanic on P-47 Thunderbolt. And he made a lot of photos of veterans, and we are showing the veterans when we met them here in the museum, because most of them here came to the museum, visited. They were here at the opening as well, but unfortunately most of them passed away now. And this is also a testimony and a story of each of them.
It must be very, very emotional.
It's very emotional, and we also have, of course, German veterans also here. Of course, US, British, Canadians, Polish.
What was this diorama? What was the thinking behind the church in the background?
Yeah, the church is there is some photos well known in the Battle of Normandy where you see Panzer IV just staying close to big buildings like that, and just in order not to be seen by the planes. And also, this church is a reproduction of the church of Trevière, which is just 5 kilometers from Omaha Beach. So we made like a copy of the church, and to make this diorama.
It's very emotional with seeing the sort of,
it's impressive,
the war machine.
The war machine and last step of Overlord operation is the Paris liberation. And we are showing a diorama about 2nd Armored Division with French guys and tanks with French marking, which is a US M8 howitzer tank, very famous in a lot of photos in Paris and in the 2nd Armored Division of General Leclerc.
Super. Thank you so much for taking the time out to show us that. I mean, all I can say is if you're in Normandy, you have to come to the Overlord Museum.
Thank you to you. Thank you for coming.
Hello and welcome back. So how did you enjoy that video then, Richard?
Overlord Museum, absolutely fantastic. I mean, what a great place to visit. And I think it's important to point out that everything where we mention, all the locations we visited as well, all of their social links will be on Twitch as well. So please support them, please follow them. Overlord Museum, I mean, a private collection, and absolutely vast for a private collection. As I said, Normandy, I'm sure every one of you that's been there before knows, you know, the wealth of history in Normandy, not just the beaches, but further inland. So many interesting, fascinating museums to visit as well.
What was your favourite bit of the museum?
Do you know, I think my favourite bit was meeting the staff of the museum. Okay. So welcoming, so incredible. I say, again, it's a very emotive collection. The way that they've got the scenario set up is it's a bit of a story as opposed to just, you know, the technology, which perhaps some other museums concentrated on. But it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Okay, so another museum you make me want to visit that I've never been to. Thanks for that. So yeah, up next is another place that you got to visit, I believe, which I'd never heard of before. So I'm pretty fascinated when I got to watch the video. But up next is, for all of you, is something called the Maisy Battery.
Welcome to Normandy and the Maisy Artillery Battery, built by the Wehrmacht as part of the Atlantic coastal fortifications. The guns located in this location covered sectors at both Omaha and Utah Beach. But to tell us more about it, here's the owner, Mr. Gary Stern.
Gun positions at Maisy were first operational in 1940 after the occupation of France by the Germans. And over time, the site developed. Originally, it would have been open gun pits with positions very reminiscent of the First World War for large caliber field guns with wheels. But over time, emplacements became concrete. Bunkers became the places where the soldiers would live alongside their guns, and headquarters and infrastructure would be made of concrete and would become buried. And that made it a lot harder for the Allies to attack. In the area of Maisy we're featuring in this aerial video, you can see a number of gun pits attached, connected, should I say, to other areas such as bunkers for ammunition, personnel bunkers, places where men would have stayed when they weren't in combat, surrounded by a ring of Tobruks, the concrete buried spaces where men could pop up and at any time could shoot you from a distance, and yet you wouldn't really, unless you were on top of them, be able to see where they were hiding. There's a ring of Tobruks surrounding the Maisy site, and overall the whole site, including the minefields in 1944, was 144 acres, which is a huge, huge area to defend. When you drive into the car park at Maisy, you'll notice that you can't see any of the site at all above ground level, and that really was how the Rangers would have seen it when they approached. They'll have just seen gunfire coming at them from very low level and not really known the scale of the site. During the start of the battle for Maisy, A Company's commander, Lieutenant Charles Parker, ordered the men to fix bayonets, and that was the first time that the Rangers had done so in combat, and it was a taste of things to come, simply because they had to face the enemy in their own trenches, in their own buildings, face to face. On the morning of the 9th of June 1944, the Rangers had no real idea of what they were going into. They were just ordered to attack this gun battery in the fields nearby. The battle for Maisy took the Rangers and the 116th Infantry plus tanks 5.5 hours to overcome, so that will give you some idea of the scale of the site and the job that the Rangers had to do. And remember, they'd only just left Omaha Beach and Pointe du Hoc in the days before that.
And welcome back. A brief interlude from DD, and just a reminder, of course, that the best display of historical moving armour is almost upon us. It is, of course, Tankfest 2024.
Yeah, so Tankfest is a 3-day event, taking part with lots of both online activities with streams, but lots of offline activities at the museum where you get to see displays. We'll be there meeting and greeting. And for the first time, I know I shouldn't say that, but as far as I know, it's the first time we're going to have a player party there, which you can sign up for. Make sure you attend and join us. So yeah, what about some of the activities that are going on there, if you can give any details?
So obviously for me, the two highlights for it, the FE4005, which with World of Tanks Wargaming, we actually supported the restoration of this vehicle. So the first time you're seeing this monstrosity will be on Tankfest, driving around the arena. And also the Belgian War Heritage Institute are bringing along their IS-3M. So two mammoth vehicles that I'm really looking forward to see. And just a taster for you, a reminder of what you could expect if you come along to Tankfest.
A good tank driver must make a quick appreciation of the ground ahead. He must be alert for obstacles in his path, making his approach at the correct speed, avoid damaging the tank and injuring the crew. The driver knows that with care, he can cross quite safely without any unpleasant surprises that might result in damage to the tank. Skillful driving keeps the tank mobile. Once cleared of the obstacle, get away as fast as possible. Tackling an obstacle at the right speed means a better chance of reaching your objective on time.
And welcome back. Now, of course, being the nature of our game, we've concentrated today on tanks and very briefly touched on some of the airborne equipment as well. But what about, of course, the seaborne vessels of Operation Overlord? Without these, victory simply would not have been possible. So what we're going to do now is pop over to Indiana in the US and visit our friend Nicholas, the Chieftain Moran, and have a look at a very special ship.
One of the unique problems presented by World War II was that the opposition tended to be on the far side of large bodies of water, be it the Atlantic or Pacific Oceans, the Mediterranean Sea, or even just the English Channel. So a challenge that needed to be solved was the question of how do you get your army ashore fast enough, in good enough condition, and with proper logistical support in order to take the fight to the enemy when he's already waiting for you on the far side. And a number of solutions were devised. Well, a group of very forward-thinking and history-minded people decided to preserve an example of one of these technical solutions. And I have come to Evansville, Indiana. I'm standing aboard LST 325, and over the next couple of minutes we're going to have a look at, well, how do you get tanks ashore from a landing ship tank? And if you look at the early attempts by the US Marine Corps to get armored vehicles ashore, like the little Marmot Harrington tankettes, more like tanks, but anyway, tracked things with armor and a gun, what they would do is they built ramps to go over the bow and then another ramp on the far side to come down again. Well, okay, that's all very well if your vehicle only weighs 3 to 4 tons. But if you're trying to land a 30-ton medium tank, that's not going to cut it. The solution was found by the British, and they created the Maracaibo ships. Now, what these were converted oil tankers. They were originally designed to transport oil around Lake Maracaibo, which is in Venezuela, and okay, hydrologists will argue whether or not it's really a lake, but suffice to say, these ships were designed specifically for the purpose of transporting heavy material, oil, in shallow draft areas. The Admiralty looked at this, thought this would be suitable conversion for a landing ship. So what they do is they seize them, basically take them out of commercial service, convert them, they install a bow ramp on the front. And so, but this combination of a shallow draft ship and a bow ramp, they have now basically invented the LST concept. They converted 3 of them before they started looking at purpose-built landing ships. Now, by the time you get to this, well, it's gotten another stage further. So now you have the 2 outer doors, one opens first and then the other. These are not water sealed. If water gets behind them, no problem. Then behind that is going to be the main ramp. Now that is the bit that is sealed, and if you see water coming in around that, then you might have a bit of a problem. The main doors thus would open sometime before you hit the beach, maybe 10 to 15 minutes. You get a bit closer and then you partially lower the main ramp. You eventually hit the beach, the ramp continues dropping, and it then moves to the control room. Forward and left of the tank deck, or on the port side if you're one of them, is the control room. And this control room, which has a nice window with a view of the tank deck, is where the bow ramp doors are controlled, and also traffic control for the vehicles which are disembarking. So to my front here we have starboard door open and closed, port door open and closed. They have to be open and closed in a certain sequence, and to help you remember that certain sequence, it says open first or close first. You know, not taking anything for granted for the intelligence levels and remembering things under stress of sailors of World War II era. And then there's a ramp, which again, hoist and lower. And then once you're ashore, all this starts happening, by the way, about 15 minutes before the beach. You think they'd open it up just as it's approaching the beach. It actually starts a little bit before that. Once they're ashore and everybody's happy that you can start offloading the vehicles, there's a traffic light system. It's red, amber, and green. However, of course, being in the Navy, red and green have a slightly different meaning. It's not stop and go, it's port and starboard. So depending on which light is on, your port light or your starboard light, well, that's which lane of vehicles are going to go out. And of course, you've also got an amber light to actually put a little bit more control on things. I haven't figured out exactly what the amber light does, but it could be a matter of one by one versus just do one side versus the other side. I haven't actually read the manual. I'm just working off of partially what the tour guides here have told me and partially personal estimation. So by use of these lights, which by the way still work, because this ship was basically turned into a museum ship straight out of service with the Hellenic Navy, they can control the off-flow of the vehicles. Also in the control room are the controls for the ventilation fans. And as you can see, there are 12 fans with start and stop. Now, there are reports that when all the tanks are operating, especially the smokier vehicles, when you're looking out of this compartment window here, you actually can't see the well deck, which then means that they cannot see you, which is another reason for having the traffic light system that they have. Above us is one of the ventilation shafts. Now, there would be a very large fan in there as well to evacuate all the air and exhaust fumes. Now, this was a sufficient enough problem that over in Fort Knox, not too many miles from here, it's about 100 miles, is a building called the LST building. It's a very strange looking building. It's made of wood and it has sort of a bow on it. And the reason this building was built was to try to solve the airflow and pollution exhaust problems of the LST. So if you look inside the LST building, you're going to see the girders are just like they are on the real ship. So by doing the testing on that wooden building, they were able to figure out what they needed to do to make the LST function suitably. Once all of the tanks or anything else on the tank deck have rolled off the ramp, well, of course, there is another entire deck above us with stuff that needs to get ashore. Now, usually that stuff up there is mounted on up to 30 trucks. But of course, you've got to get them from up there to down here. And the solution to that is an elevator. Now, it works just like, let's say, the elevator you see in an aircraft carrier. You've seen it in the movies, just come straight down. To get the vehicles down, these yellow shafts, one for each corner of the elevator, get lowered and they go into little sockets on the deck here. Once you've lowered those shafts, well, the next thing you do is you get the cables for the elevator. They're stowed forward, put them around the pulleys, and then there is a winch which will simply winch the platform up or down. Now, it's about a 6-minute cycle to drive a truck, and there are up to 30 on the upper deck, onto the platform, lower the platform, drive the truck off, raise the platform, and position another truck to continue. So if you're talking about 30 vehicles up top, plus all the ones that are in the tank deck as well, offloading an LST is up to a 2-hour plus process. Now, in order to speed this up a little bit, later versions of the LST, instead of having an elevator like this one, actually had a ramp. You would lower the ramp and you could simply drive from the upper deck to the lower deck and then ashore. So it's all very well saying, oh, she'll take 2 columns of 10 Shermans each, but I don't think you really get to visualize how big a ship that makes it until you actually start walking the entire 328 feet of length. Of course, this ship has to go back whence it came, and there's no point in going back empty, especially with a nice big large flat deck here. Well, it's brilliant for using it as a medical evacuation vehicle. So you would have rows of stretchers all lined up on the deck. But what happens if you have more casualties that can fit on the deck? Well, they have actually built in specific hatches for stretchers. They will lift up, push forward, and it will go into the compartments and passageways on the sides, including down to the surgeon's office at the far end. Now, the astute would notice, were they to look down this hatch here, that there's a lot of water underneath me. And this is one of the little secrets of the LST. Now, the ballast tanks had a couple of purposes, not least to keep the ship a little bit more stable when it's crossing the Atlantic, because in order to get ashore, it's got to have a flat bottom. Oh, flat bottoms and transoceanic don't necessarily go well together, but that's not our problem as tankers. Our problem as tankers is we got to get ashore, which means that you got to have as little a draft as possible. So by emptying out the ballast tanks, they can raise the ship up a little bit and thus get closer to shore before they have to beach and drop ramp. The other advantage of the ballast tank, of course, is once you've gotten ashore, you still have to get off again, because you've just rammed your 14 to 1600 ton vessel onto shore. You're probably a little bit stuck. And by using the ballast tanks, well, first thing, you can raise it a little bit to get a little bit closer to shore before you run aground and you drop the ramp. And secondly, especially if you're wounded, you would like to get back off again the other way. Pump out more of the ballast, the ship will raise a little bit further, and then with your stern anchor, you can claw yourself off the beach and go back to Old Blighty. There are 2 main hazards that you're going to find on a ship that mariners tend not to like. One is a fire, and the other is an unstable cargo. Especially when each item of that cargo is 30-something ton, you can imagine that having a tank sliding around in rough weather would probably not be great for the ship's stability and resistance to capsizing. So you want to tie it to the deck. And the way they've done it is they've made these little cutouts on the deck, little X-shaped cutouts, and using a special attachment, you simply hook it in, tie the other end to the tie-down point of your vehicle, tighten it up with the screw mechanism, and your tank is now lashed. And that's it. The process for getting yourself off the beach actually begins before you get to the beach. And that is done when you drop this stern anchor, I think it's up to 1/4 mile offshore. And you simply let the line pay out until you hit the beach. It stays out there until it's time to leave. At which point you do several things. Firstly, you put the engines in reverse. Secondly, you pump out the ballast. And thirdly, you turn on the winch and you drag yourself off the beach by use of the stern anchor until you're fully afloat, finish winching it up, and home you go. Of course, there's more to the ship than simply transporting vehicles. It's also got to transport the crews to man the vehicles. And the port side of the ship is troop berthing. They'll have up to 200 racks here for the vehicle's crews. Now, you might think it would be useful to put these guys to work. Let's say be air guards or stand watches, or even in the Falklands, what they would do is the troops would go topside and lash their machine guns to the railings to use as additional air defense. Well, apparently not so in World War II. It was considered that army troops would do more harm than good, and they should just stay out of the way and let the sailors deal with the ship part of things, to include the standing watches, the air defense, manning the guns, and so on. which basically means that the duties of the people stuck in troop berthing were limited to every now and then going to the vehicle, turning the engine over to make sure that it still worked and the batteries were charged and the fluids were cycling, and then staying out of the way. So it's sleep, eat, and find something else to do. The starboard side of the ship, by the way, that's where the sailors were berthed. Of course, one of the highlights of any soldier's day is chow time. And if you come aft of the ship and go up a couple of decks, you're going to hit the galley. It's a one-way system, so you come up one of the ladders, or staircases, should you be Army, grab your tray, 3 square meals, okay, it's a square, it's a rectangle, get whatever it is you're going to eat, and you just keep on going the one-way system down the ladder on the far side. Now, a couple of terms that soldiers will be familiar with are inhaling your food or eat now, taste it later. And, well, this is the entire mess deck. Now, okay, granted, in World War II it was a little bit larger. They've blocked off a couple of bits here and there, but remember, you're dealing with nearly 200 soldiers and 150 sailors. That is a lot of people. They have to go with a throughput in order to make sure everybody gets fed. So literally, as you come down, you don't spend too much time talking. Be polite about it. Sit down, eat your food, and get going. Now, of course, there is one meal which is going to be a little bit different to all the others. And that is the last supper, or the last breakfast, or whatever the heck time of day it is that you have it. That's the one that you're going to go ashore immediately afterwards. And, well, that is going to be a nicer setup than all of the other meals. Apparently spaghetti was always a popular one because it got lots of carbs. Unfortunately, spaghetti is also apparently something that one is likely to throw up a lot more easily. And there are plenty of documents stating that troopers lost their lunch before they even hit the shoreline. Either way, once you're done, pick up and go. Of course, this isn't a cruise ship that you get on just before it leaves. You can imagine that if a couple of hundred troops are cramped inside a ship for a few days, it could get a little bit ripe. Fortunately, they thought of that, and the ship is well equipped with shower, washing, and latrine facilities. 1,051 of these LSTs were built in World War II, and although not the flashiest of vessels, you gotta admit, without them, the counter-invasion of Europe probably wouldn't have happened. Now, this particular vessel is in Evansville, Indiana. It is open to the public. Just check on the Facebook page or website. Make sure it's not on one of its annual cruises. Like this year, it's going to West Virginia and Pennsylvania. And you can come check it out for yourself. So I'd like to thank the staff of LST 325 for hosting us and showing us around. Hope you learned a few things about, well, just what it is to get a tank ashore. And I'll kick it back to the studio. Take care.
And welcome back to the D-Day story here in Portsmouth. And of course, a massive shout out to Nicholas and all the staff of LST 325.
And thank you again from us at Wargaming and World of Tanks, and thank you to Andrew. I hope you enjoy your drop. Stick around a little bit longer to claim what's left. I'm sure all of you know what's going on with the visual. We'll be around for a couple of more minutes, so make sure you claim them before it's too late. And I want to say thank you again, Andrew, for hosting us and giving this cool time. Would you like to tell us more about the story and what's going on?
Yeah, well, just to say that our website is thedaystory.com, and you can find out more about visiting the museum. We've got an online shop, so various items that you might be interested in. Do have a look there. More information about events that we have coming up, and also if looking around the museum has piqued your interest, we've got information about some of our collections that's online, so you can see more about some of the objects that we have that's on display, and also some not on display. And thanks again to you both for coming here.
Thank you very much.
And before we disappear, of course, I must say a huge shout out to everybody that took part in this live stream. All of the museums, the Tank Museum, of course, in Bomington, Saumur, Overlord Museum in Normandy, Maisy Battery and Gary, who's the owner there. But again, most of all, we'd like to thank for hosting us, the D-Day story here in Portsmouth. And again, for all of these locations, please, please, please check out Twitch, go and support them, because, you know, without your support, none of these places can actually operate anymore. It's all about people visiting them and keeping that history alive. So that's it from us. And of course, the biggest thank you to you all for taking the time out, for joining us this evening down here in Portsmouth, and to see us out finally. We're actually going to go across to Mr. Kevin Wheatcroft, and we're going to finish with a ship this time, a Schnellboot, or an S-boat. But to tell you more, here's Kevin. And until we see you again, take care and goodbye.
Thank you.
And now for something incredibly special. I give you what is believed to be the sole surviving S-boat, S130. Now let's go and catch up with the owner, Mr. Kevin Wheatcroft. So we're here now with Kevin Wheatcroft. Now, we've known each other, Kevin, for a fair few years now. And of course, everything we've ever dealt with in the past has always been armoured vehicles. The sheer scale of S130, Kevin, I mean, what possessed you?
It's easy when you're buying from a little photograph, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, as you know, my collecting doesn't follow one particular route. It's very much whatever I think is a significant piece that needs to survive. And obviously an S-boat is. It took me years to find the thing, not realising it was the only one left, which I strongly believe it's the only one in existence above the water. And luckily it's in good enough condition that it's relatively simple to salvage. Bearing in mind I want it to operate again as it would have done, as it was designed to do, and create a living piece of history. So it's not just a paintbrush job, it's got to be rebuilt as good as it was the day it was built.
Fantastic. I mean, you did say earlier, 120 tons?
120 tons when they're laden ready for sea.
Good heavens.
And 120 foot near enough in length. It's a big vessel. Compared to any of the enemy craft, it was twice the size of PT boats or British MTBs. It's just the whole shape of the thing and the mystery of the S-boat. In a way, it was as important for World War II in naval terms as the U-boat. It was just a bigger threat. So it was always a dream to find one, and then I was lucky enough to hear rumour of the survival of this one, which we then followed through, and I managed to acquire it, which was the easy bit. We want it to do what it was designed to do, not sink things, but to go at the speeds it was designed to go at. So we have to restore it as if it's a race car. You know, it's got to better do what it says on the tin. So we've tracked down original engines. If we're having to make anything new, it's done from original drawings, original pictures, wherever possible, copying everything exactly, because it is going to be a statement in its own right. It's a piece of history, so the only way to do it is to do it right.
I mean, we'll look at some of the engines, I think, later on anyway, but when we look at the sheer scale of what the job is at the moment, and I mean, how many years has this been here now? You've been working on it?
I think, in fairness, it's only about 10 years. Innocently, I brought it thinking it's got to be saved, not fully understanding the pitfalls of owning a 120-foot boat. Building this shed was one cost. Getting it out of the water was a second cost. Then finding all the missing parts, which has took me the best part of that 10 years. But we've tracked down original engines, torpedo tubes, original armoured bridge, gun platforms, all the deck equipment, all the sort of plotting equipment, radios, enigmas, everything down to tea towels and binoculars. Now I realise with a wooden boat, if you're going to restore it, it's got to be part wet and part dry, i.e. sat in water, but covered from the elements. So that opened up another chapter. I then had to find a suitable home, which we've now, after 2 years of searching, located a place in North Devon, Richmond Dock, and a beautiful seaside town called Appledore. We've brought that now, and we're now almost through the planning hoops with a view of starting work in the next 2 months, ideally, and then we've got some of the summer left. So what we're creating is something that still looks like an 1830s shipyard from the outside, but from the inside, you will step into a World War II U-boat pen.
Wow.
So it's not just the boat. We've got our submarine collection. We've got trucks, cranes, torpedoes, spare engines, mines, depth charges. So we can decorate this U-boat pen almost as it would have been at the time. So from stepping in the front door, you're going back in time. let alone stepping aboard the boat, which will be done on an equal level. Hence, it's taken so long to get all that detail together. But it's had to build the home before we built the rebuilt the boat. That's why it's took so long.
So, Kevin, absolutely love the room we're in at the moment. We're surrounded by diagrams, schematics. I mean, was it quite hard to get hold of all this information?
Some easier than others. I mean, basically, we trawled through any archive anywhere on naval craft and just copied anything we could get our hands on. We brought every book we could find. I was immensely lucky in the family Schlichting, who built the craft in the first place, were incredibly helpful and pointed me to a number of archivists that could help me out. So as a consequence, we've got drawings of everything from the teapot to the engine. So we can double check every detail. With S130, it's slightly more difficult because it's one of only 10 boats built as an interim from the early model to the late war model. So it encompassed a number of early and late features, which made my job twice as difficult in finding parts. But that wasn't known at the time. Had it have been, would it have made any difference? Probably not. The thing needed to survive. It's just another one of those hurdles that you've got to overcome.
I mean, you're known for a perfectionist. I mean, I know from your military vehicles, you like things to be 100% correct.
Yeah, I think actually, financially, which is a big part of it, is to do it right or to do it to look right. There isn't that much difference. Yeah. So if you build something that you want to last for as long as it's already been here, I've got an obligation. I have to do it right, otherwise it doesn't outlive me. And with all this collecting, it's yeah, you own it and you get the pleasure from it, but what you're really doing is investing in future generations so that thing survives and people can experience what they looked, felt and smelt like. One of the cross-section drawings here shows actually ideally what we were missing when we brought S130. I was busy trying to find remains of other boats, and I heard a story where 5 were chained together and sunk on May the 8th, 45 in Danish waters. Well, long story short, we supplied some vintage cars for one of the royal weddings in Denmark. They owed me a favour, and that favour transpired being permission to dive on these wrecks. The one we dived on, unknown at the time, was exactly the same model as S130, and I was given the option to lift the boat or take off the boat, whatever I needed. So from that dive, which was basically 48-hour turnaround, one crew member after another, we found a matched set of 3 torpedoes for this Mercedes-Benz engine that we have. We also found all 3 of the deck weapon platforms, the complete armoured bridge, complete pair of torpedo tubes with their doors, 3 inert torpedoes, and a number of other parts. So overnight, or over a 48-hour dive period, we pretty well found everything we needed to complete this craft.
So Kevin, the engine side of it, and again, I'm pretty much blown away by this. I have to say, I didn't appreciate. So 3 of these for S130.
Yeah, three engines. So you've got the standard port and starboard engine. Then you have a centerline engine, all the same identical specification. The Mercedes V20s producing around 3,000 horsepower each, supercharged. The nice thing about this engine, it's such a good engine, it was still in use all over the world into the 80s, and I can ring a Mercedes Marine agent and still buy filters, pistons, shells. So they're an easy engine to maintain. But what's most important, these are all wartime engines. We have 6 engines, so there'll be 3 restored for the boat, 3 were restored for static exhibition within our museum, but they're ready for a change should the boat ever need, an engine swap.
I can imagine, as soon as you say Mercedes, reliability,
Yeah, build quality and reliability, and truly so in this case, because the fact that they've been used for so many years is proof of how good they were.
We talked briefly about the exterior, that's, you know, one thing, but what about the interior? I mean, how was S130 when you got it? Was there still a lot interior, or?
There was more than we first thought. The biggest problem was deciphering what was wartime and what was post-war, as this vessel had been used as a sort of a platform to test various engines in its post-war role. Obviously, many things have changed. So we binned everything that was post-war and kept and have continued to search for whatever's missing to bring it up to, you know, correct wartime specs. So we have all the engine
rackfuls here.
Yeah, I mean, and this is only 50% of it, but you know, there's all the valve systems, the engine pulley lift systems, which, you know, obviously the engine room had to be a workshop. You should be able to lift the cylinder heads off in situ and work on the engines at sea. So they were a fully functioning workshop as well. These are basically the dashboards, so there'll be one for each engine, which give you all, you know, forward and reverse, revs in each gear, oil pressures, engine running temperatures, all your fuse boards, just like a modern car really, but on a far bigger scale. Cabin heaters, this is all the central lubrication system for the shafts. They were quite advanced, and the idea was make as many of the systems mechanised so that one man could do a number of jobs to keep the crew levels down, because these could carry up a crew of up to 36, depending on whatever mission it was out on. So the more jobs that could be doubled up, the less it meant the less crew on board and more room for fuel and ammunition, basically.
Is there a search for anything in particular still, or do you think you're pretty happy with what you got?
I think until we start putting it together, I'm not 100% sure. But things I know we're missing is the main steering box, the triple throttle body that's up in the cockpit, and of all things, the cooker out of the ship's galley. I'm sure all will turn up, but it's part of the fun of it, really. Each find brings with it its own stories. And I have to admit, whilst it's hard work, it's a lot of fun as well, because it's the people you meet along the way and the stories, and that all adds to the overall history of saving this craft.
And worst case scenario, there is something you require, you can't find, can't source anywhere. I mean, is it possible to rebuild it?
Yeah, I mean, nothing's impossible. It's just cost, really. We try to keep, you know, reproduction parts to a minimum, but of course there are cases when you have to. But if that is the case, then we try and follow the original spec as faithfully as possible.
So here we are now on the deck of S130, and again, Kevin, I think it gives you, it was certainly for me, it gives an appreciation of the sheer scope of the vessel. I mean, it's incredible, really, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's a big old girl.
Now, talking about weaponry that was on here, behind us.
Well, that's the important bit, yeah. They would carry a complement of 6 torpedoes, 2 in the tubes, and then 2 behind each tube on rails. So they were like little train rails to take the torpedoes forward and winched up and into the tube itself to make life easier. And they usually would try and keep them balanced. 2 were fired, 2 would be reloaded. Here you had ammunition storage, mines, depth charges in these 2 rooms. And on the back there was a socket which was adaptable for 2 centimetre flak, single, double, quadruple, or the 3.7 naval cannon. Midships there would be another 2 centimetre mounted there, where the original mount is still in, and then another 2 centimetre forward.
And would these be half the source, or have you got them already? Or?
I was lucky enough to find all the weapons brand new in Finland some years ago. So we've got a full complement of weapons and spare barrels and equipment, all the stowage boxes. And then in Norway, about 3 years ago, I found a stock of new old stock torpedoes, believe it or not, with spare warheads, engines, all the tools and equipment, a full complement of mines and depth charges. So this vessel has sufficient to to load it completely with original equipment.
These look pristine though, Kevin. I mean, I'll be honest, first time I saw them I thought, oh, they're just replicas or something. Or...
No, they are. I mean, they are pristine because they've just not done anything. They've been in storage since the day they were built and maintained by the Norwegian Navy, as the Type 7 was a torpedo they wanted to continue using after the war. And Norway had U-boats until 1968. So there was a very real need. And I suppose it's one of those things that got left in the stores, and luckily I found it.
Now, the whole project itself, Kevin, I mean, obviously there's a lot to do. Have you got any sort of time frame in mind, or is it not something you really want to think about?
I think literally as we leave here, we want to start to get the engines underway, get all 6 rebuilt, do the props, the prop shafts, the rudders. That gives me some progress forward whilst we renovate the new home for S130, as I mentioned earlier, in Devon. And at that point, when we have a completion date, we'll start the restoration of the boat. So the boat can go out and do its sea trials and then come home to Devon, and it's in its own home then. So in the water, which it's meant to be as a wooden boat, but undercover to keep it safe and keep the weather off the decks.
Fantastic. Kevin, firstly, thank you so much for taking time out and allowing us to see this incredible project which you've taken on. And all I can say is, from all of us that, you know, who love history, thank you so much for doing what you do.
Been a pleasure. Thank you.